At this world's beginning, there was no magic. There were no nations warring. There were no fights for power. There was just society, struggling to survive as one group. But then, after thousands of years, for reasons now lost to time, magic appeared. At first it seemed random. People would have the ability to take strange and otherworldly actions seemingly with no logic to it at all, but it soon became apparent that many individuals shared similar abilities. People identified those with the like personalities tended to have powers that functioned nearly identically. Along with this came the discovery of the Essence, a core existing within all living beings, which also acted as the key to an individual's magic power. This led to the unveiling of what are today known as essence types. It turned out that all people who had these same powers and personalities also had the same essence types. After more research, it was found that everyone who existed had either one or multiple of these essence types within them. However, despite all people of an essence type having a set of powers identical to each other, there were also powers that did seem to be truly random, and there was no common thread between them. These powers were dubbed the unique ability and the magic weapon. They could do practically anything, with the only caveats being that the spells of magic weapons had to be held within a magical construct the particular individual could create. The world determined that, while the powers granted by one's essence type were important to train and hone, the power of one's unique ability and magic weapon would be what determined your place in the world. And with that, the continent of Luxon was born. A land split between 21 regions, with the first 20 each representing a different essence type, and the final one being the capital, ruled by the person considered to be the strongest in all of Luxon. How wrong all of them were, as no one realized that what made you garner power wasn't strength itself, but the willingness to corrupt yourself for that strength.
The Bastion, the capital of this world for at least the last 1,000 years, a place of constant movement, energy, and conversation. A nation where powerful nobles and homeless peasants alike coexisted. Under the rule of the Pride King, Edmund Farelyn, it was constantly in a state of stress and chaos, his cruel nature and immense power looming over everything that happened, but in no place more than Permata, the capital city of both the Bastion and all of Luxon. A man approached the door to a tavern. It was quite remote, on the outskirts of Permata City. He walked with an air of stress to him, taking a deep breath as he reached his hand out to the door. Tonight, he was in a tattered gray shirt with torn brown pants. His jet black hair was going whichever way it felt, completely unkempt. His most noticeable trait were his bright green eyes that glowed enough he would still draw attention on most days, even in such tattered garb. He lifted a hand to run it through his knotted hair before smiling and entering the tavern. The inside of the tavern was nothing special. It lacked upkeep and was quite run down. Some floorboards were missing, a few rats were sitting in a corner, and the furniture was made of rickety wood that could collapse at any moment. However, the energy of the tavern was unmatched. Men were clinking glasses, shouting and drinking pint after pint of alcohol. They were telling jokes, playing games, and the whole aura of the tavern was one of joy and positivity. But when the man took a step inside and closed the door, everything froze. Every person in the tavern stopped talking and stared at him, before erupting in laughter.
What is up with you?
What in God's name, Marwin? You look like you're right out of Radiant Fields with that shoddy getup. You get mugged on the way here?
The man placed a hand on Marwin's shoulder, smirking at him. This man had a much more put-together appearance. He had dark blue eyes that glowed almost to the same extent as Marwin's, and his same colored hair was just kept up enough to keep from looking ratty. He was wearing padded leather armor and had a sword at his side.
Oh, calm down, Ewan. I just took a stop at your sister's place before coming. I thought I'd just give her a gift from the new King of Luxon. But she really kept me for a while. I could barely walk out of there.
Oh, fuck you and your new King of Luxon. Seriously, what's up with this getup? Doesn't suit your soon-to-be position now, does it?
Yoren tugged at Marwen's collar, and the tattered fabric quickly broke apart, a sizable piece of cloth ripping off of his shirt. Marwen looked down at it before reaching a hand up to scratch the back of his head.
You should know how important it is that we aren't caught tonight, especially me. Besides, how much more humiliating is it going to be when somebody in torn clothes shoves a sword up Edmund's ass? Now, everyone, get your ass over here and sit down. No time for small talk. We have a plan to get through.
Within the next minute, the 24 or so men made their way to a table in the center of the tavern, sitting around it and leaving the center 2 seats free for Marwen and Yoren.
So, anything changed, or are we going forward as planned?
Mostly as planned. The only thing that's changed is timing. Turns out that bastard got wind of the plan. Or, well, not the plan, but that someone was trying to kill him. As you probably heard, tomorrow he's gonna give some kind of big speech about his power or some shit to stroke his own ego. I got word from the castle that he'll be coming out sometime tonight to prepare. And we'll get him then, instead of waiting for tomorrow. Everybody got that?
Wait, the hell? You can't expect us to go along with something that could so obviously be a trap!
That's right! If he knows someone's out for him, we can't possibly get a clean kill! This is suicide!
Over the next few minutes, the group of men started to shout in agreement with the other rebels, getting louder and louder as Marwen leaned on his hand in annoyance.
Like it get better any time in the future.
Comrades, calm down. The plan is still sound. Whether or not he knows it's coming, if we were relying on the element of surprise, we wouldn't have so many of you in the first place. Remember, you all don't even need to see the bastard.
The men slowly calmed down, but still had hesitant expressions on their faces.
Fine, we'll still go along with it. But we aren't leaving the outskirts till we have his head in front of us.
Thank you. Now can we start reviewing? Or does someone else want to ask another burning question with an obvious answer?
Marwen looked around the room expectantly for anyone to speak up.
No one? Good, then let's get started. 2 hours from now, you guys are gonna start a ruckus. Remember, no one actually gets hurt. If you seriously hurt anyone, then the guards will kill you. Just cause enough of an annoyance that the gilded guards come out to stop you. If Erised is with them, then continue. If not, then stop the rioting immediately. Your continued chaos will be my signal that Erised isn't with the king. If it goes well and she ends up here, then Yoren and I will go wait in the square for him to walk around in preparation. Then we'll kill him. If Erised gets too violent, then stop. We just need her occupied until that bastard's dead. Everyone clear on that?
Right.
Then by this time tomorrow, we should be hailing our new king. Let's have a drink for our new king, Marwen the Reclaimer.
Yoren stood up and grabbed the hand of Marwen, raising it up to the air as the men held their glasses to the sky, cheering for him.
To the new king!
To a new era!
That old bastard won't even know what hit him.
Let's hear it! For the Promised King!
For the Promised King!
For the
That's
Promised
right!
King!
To the new King
the
of
Promised
Luxon!
King!
We'll
For
show
the
that
Promised
proud
King!
cunt who
For the
truly holds
Promised
the power now!
The door to the tavern shot open as a sickle with a pink luminescent blade shot through the air. Attached to the handle was an intertwined red and black ribbon flowing behind the blade as the weapon flew across the room and lodged itself into the man's throat. A look of panic spread across his face as he tried to scream, gurgling on his own blood, and it spurted far across the floor. He brought his hands to his neck to dislodge it, but that only increased the bleeding. In the next few moments, his gurgling died down, and he collapsed to the floor with a thud, going quiet as his blood pooled under him.
Aw, that guy died. How sad. Wonder how that new king will deal with that, am I right?
The source of the sickle revealed itself as a woman who had just entered the room. She was quite a short individual, standing no higher than 5 feet tall. She had a light tan skin tone and piercing yellow eyes, the same color as her hair, which was straight going all the way down to her mid-back. Her attire matched that of a jester, with a green and yellow patchwork dress, as well as wooden clogs and a large two-tailed hat with bells at the end of it. Despite her youthful appearance and playful demeanor, everyone in the tavern was frozen at the sight of her. It was the woman Morrowind specifically wanted to avoid engaging with, the leader of King Edmund's personal task force, the Gilded Guard, Erised, the Laughing Butcher.
You son of a bitch, you'll pay for that!
Urine, don't do it!
Ah!
Urine swung his blade at Erised's throat, but he barely even started swinging before he found himself with a sickle in his stomach. She had quickly pierced his gut, and with a little force behind it, she ripped the blade through Urine's abdomen, his intestines and blood spilling across the floor.
Why? I don't understand. How did you...
If there is any justice in this world, then you will fall tonight by my hand!
Morrowind stood up with a blank expression and clenched his fists. In the next moment, he had summoned his magic weapon, a pair of bright golden claws over his fists, with 4 long blades extending at least a foot outward each. He took an offensive stance and stared down Erised.
Men, don't attack! Leave this to me.
I would call this assisted suicide, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to kill you. So we'll leave it at mutilation.
Morrowind jumped at Erised, letting out a shout of rage, attempting to dig the claws into her face, but she was prepared for such a move. She responded by holding one sickle in front of her face to deflect, while swinging the other at his hands. It was clear that despite being high in spirit, Morrowind lacked experience, a fact only proven when Morrowind's hands fell from his arms, hitting the ground as blood poured from his wrists.
Do I need to get your feet too, or...
As Erised took the moment to gloat, she let her guard down for a moment, and Morrowind let out a passionate scream, winding his head back and slamming it into Erised's, knocking her down to the floor.
Take that, goddamn whore.
With a loud grunt, Morrowind raised his leg into the air before attempting to stomp on Erised's skull. Erised seemed to have been dazed by the headbutt, but it didn't last long. As his foot came down onto her, she grabbed a hold of his ankle and looked up into his eyes with a psychotic grin. Morrowind seemed confused for a moment, but then Erised brought her other hand up to the one holding his shoe and entwined the fingers on both hands, causing Morrowind's expression to change from one of confusion to one of pure petrification.
Wait. Don't! Everyone run!
Aw, what's the matter? Scared? Don't be. It only hurts for a moment.
Morrowind got off of Erised and started running, as did the rest of the men. But it was too late for them. The area above Erised's hand started to glow a crimson color before the glow rapidly expanded, shooting out to cover about 30 feet of space around her in every direction. Erised began to laugh psychotically at a high pitch, and the sounds of screaming and shouting men were heard throughout the tavern. Bright orange blades of fire materialized in the sky, mercilessly slashing at everyone in the building for what felt like an eternity, mutilating their arms, legs, chest, head. Nowhere and no one was safe from the blade's wrath. This included Erised herself, who was beginning to drip blood from all over as the slices hit her. Chaos lasted about 30 seconds before the screams died down. After it was over, Erised stood up, blood flowing down her whole body. She took in a deep breath and looked around to see everyone laying in a pool of blood, dead, on the floor except for Morrowind, who had been amputated below the knee by the slashes and was bleeding profusely from all over, just as Erised had planned. She approached him and looked down with a playful smile.
Well, you wanted to meet the king so badly. Why don't we go see him, huh?
Sitting at the pinnacle of Castle Primata, The largest castle in Luxon was the throne room of the king, and it was every bit as gaudy as one might expect. There was a golden aesthetic to the entire room, with crimson banners that had gilded outlines across the wall, golden pillars, and a carpet that spanned in a line from the entrance of the room to the throne, which had the symbol of the king's house, House Farelyn, on it with a golden outline. The symbol depicted a bright shining star above a pile of swords that had gotten so hot under the heat that they were melting together. And even though the whole room was elegant, gold, and over the top, the throne itself was practically the opposite. It was made out of pitch-black rotting wood, which formed a large chair for the ruler to sit in at the bottom, while the back of the throne went up like a black tree trunk reaching up and outside of the castle itself through a hole in the roof. The rotting limbs coming off from the top of the trunk weren't visible from within the throne room, but if you were outside, you would clearly see the limbs spreading out above the castle. This throne was always to remain empty by the king's own decree. Next to this behemoth of a throne was a small chair, one that might be found in any ordinary tavern. And sitting in this chair was the king himself, Edmund Farelyn, better known across the lands as Edmund the Gold. Edmund Farelyn was a name feared across Luxon. If he was visiting another nation, it would stop all activities in preparation for his arrival. He was known for never taking even the slightest disrespect, and for being cruel to all those below him. Despite this infamy, though, the man himself looked almost ordinary. Edmund was a small, pale man, maybe 5 feet and 7 inches tall, and very thin. He didn't wear any regal attire, not even a crown. Instead, he simply wore a white cloth shirt with the cloth tearing over several places, and a hunter green coat over it. His pants were long, black, and untorn, and he had on brown leather shoes like any peasant might wear. By all accounts, if he was in a crowd, one might be forgiven for mistaking him for a peasant, if not for his face, which had golden yellow eyes which could pierce through the souls of an entire crowd, and his equally golden-colored hair, which, while short and unkempt, gave off an energy unmatched by anyone else in all of Luxon. And it was here he sat, his elbow resting on an armrest, head relaxing into the palm of his hand, eyes closed. He had drifted off after waiting here for nearly the entire night. Finally, the silence of the room was interrupted abruptly by the sound of 2 large doors opening, with a woman entering through them.
What are you doing? Wake your ass up, there's a report to hear.
Edmund's eyes slowly opened, and he looked up at the woman with disinterest.
Sorry, I was having a strange dream, but that doesn't matter. What took you so long? I was beginning to think that they had gotten the better of her.
If she had been bested, we both know I'd have dealt with them myself. So what does it matter how long it took?
The woman who entered the room was much taller than the king, standing at just over 6 feet tall. She had a muscular stature and a pale complexion. Her eyes were crimson red, and her silver waist-length hair was tied up into a ponytail on the back left side of her head, leaving bangs just over her ears. For her attire, she wore quite regal clothing, having on a white-collared shirt, as well as a black tie that held a red gem just above it on her collarbone. She had on a black skirt, black leggings, and a black coat with an open-shouldered collar. All 3 articles of clothing were hemmed in dark gold. Finally were a pair of black boots, going about halfway up to her knee before stopping. She was clearly an extraordinarily regal individual which held her image in high regard. She was both the princess of a noble family in the nation of love magic, and the personal hitwoman of the king, Alpina Armana. She was also the only woman known to be able to get away with showing attitude to King Edmund without punishment, as she had just done.
And if he had beaten you? Whatever. It doesn't matter now. How did it go?
Erised encountered the group at a tavern on the outskirts of the city and apprehended the leader. She had to resort to using her unbridled fury slashes after a moment of poor judgment, and killed the rest of the men. As we speak, Merowyn is sitting in the dungeon and Erised is recovering.
I specifically told her not to use the slashes by any means necessary. I swear those Wrath users are fucking worthless. Where is she now?
Oh, she's in her chambers trying to rest and recover. Why do you ask?
I'm going to go pay her a visit. Go to the council room and wait there. I'll be there with her shortly.
After he finished speaking, Edmund walked out of the room. Alpina tried to open her mouth to speak, but seeing him leave, she opted just to stay quiet. Edmund made his way down a large spiral staircase with golden railings on the way to where he knew Eriset's chambers were. At the bottom of the stairs, he came to a long hallway which he made his way through quickly, an expression of anger and annoyance on his face. He opened both hands while walking, a yellow spark appearing in them for a moment before his magic materialized into a massive golden scythe, easily taller than he was, with a curved edge spanning almost 3 feet long. Being made out of magic, however, it was completely weightless for him, and he transferred it to his left hand as he arrived to the door of Eriset's chambers and opened it up.
Damn it! Can you not follow the simplest of orders, you useless fool? After such a display, I should have you made an example of and hang you from...
In front of the king was a sight of blood splattered all across the room. What was normally a very clean and proper room was now akin to a murder scene, with blood staining the carpet, bedsheets, and the door Edmund had just entered through, and laying on top of the bloodied bed was Eriset herself, dried blood all across her body. Unbridled Fury Slashes is considered to be the ultimate power of wrath magic, only accessible to those magicians who have trained their wrath for decades, if not centuries on end. This comes with the benefit of being the ultimate trump card for a wrath user, almost guaranteeing victory for those within the range of the attack. But it comes at the cost of being nearly random. The slashes let loose by the attack almost always heavily injure the caster, though they have never been known to actually kill them. And here, after unleashing it in a fight, Eriset was suffering the consequences of casting an ability of such pure, unfiltered destruction, clinging to life, letting out raspy and pained breaths every few seconds. With such a view in front of him, Edmund couldn't help but feel pity, his rage dying down as he simply frowned at the woman.
You made a fool of yourself. The laughing butcher bloodied and brought to the brink of death from her own attack. How pathetic.
It got the job done, didn't it?
That's not the point. You made yourself vulnerable.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Merowyn's in custody. Besides, I can always just switch.
And switch you will. Tomorrow morning, your first duty is to find a suitable body.
Eriset brought her hand up to her face in a playful salute.
Whatever you say.
But that's tomorrow's business. So get up. Alpina's waiting for us in the council room.
Waiting for what? Can't you tell I'm a bit busy?
Perhaps if you hadn't released so much power, you wouldn't be in recovery. Take this and get moving. Now!
Edmund reached into one of his pockets and pulled out a vial of green liquid. He tossed it to Eriset, who caught it and quickly drank the concoction. Instantly, the wounds on her body began to close and heal. By the time the healing was done, she was still far from good as new, but the wounds were no longer life-threatening. With a sigh of relief, she started moving slowly, and Edmund glared at her intensely, causing her to speed up. The two of them made their way farther through the hallway her chambers were in before reaching a set of stairs that went upwards. They swiftly walked up the staircase and found themselves in a remote area of the castle. It was just as regal as the rest of it, but it was very dimly lit. Edmund walked up to a pair of double doors and opened it, revealing a large room with a table fit for 21 people. However, it only had one in it currently, Alpina, who was sitting on the left side of the room, her feet kicked up on the table. She immediately looked to Eriset and laughed softly.
Oh my, you really do look like shit.
Just be quiet. I don't want to talk about it.
Well, maybe if you'd listen, you wouldn't end up in these situations.
Knock it off. We have an important matter to discuss. What is to be done with Morrowind?
You know, this really seems like something the actual council should weigh in on, not us.
That spineless council would have me send him into the dungeon and leave it at that. According to them, things are good in Luxon, and acting on such a small-scale rebellion would make us look weak. It's idiotic! But I'm not so foolish to ignore reason completely, so I want you two to weigh in.
Kill him then.
Edmund raised an eyebrow, looking over to Erised.
You seem confident in that decision. Why?
What does it matter if your nation looks weak? You still have me, Alpina, Esteban, Tiara, and so many others who could kill entire armies on their own. So I think you should kill him and double down on it. Anyone dares to step to you, they get eliminated without thought.
I have to agree with her on this matter. You need to separate those who respect you from those who respect your nation. You will never get people to respect the Bastion as a whole, especially with weaklings all around. But if you make sure your own power is on display, the people will always obey.
Edmund leaned back against a wall and smirked at the two women.
I thought as much. Maybe after this I'll have to eliminate those foolhardy councilmen. Show them why ignoring the problem will never solve it.
I wouldn't go that far. They still have valuable assets to give us.
Right. I was getting too carried away. Alpina, come with me. We're going to the execution stands.
You were thinking this would happen all along, weren't you? That's why you planned a speech for today. Not to talk about your power, but to show your power.
Well, I certainly knew it was a possibility, but let me assure you, the people will know the cost of rebellion.
Edmund began walking out of the room with Alpina following.
Wait, what do I do?
Go get the prisoner and bring him to the stands, of course.
With not a word more, Edmund and Alpina exited the room. Erised got out of her chair and sighed before walking out as well. She made her way further down the hallway and down another large staircase. At the bottom was a wooden hatch with a large lock. Erised simply placed her hand over the lock, and with a click it fell from the hatch. She opened it up and was met with a new set of stairs, descending into darkness. She slowly made her way down, and the further she went, the darker it became, with the only lighting being from scant torches placed across the wall. It was cold, damp, inhospitable, like people came down here only once every 100 years. This only became more true as she reached the end of the staircase and was met with a hallway almost entirely devoid of light. She walked down the hallway and saw cells on her sides, many of which were filled with rotting bodies and bones of people left to die in the dungeons, with no hope of escape. The smell would normally be enough to make a person retch, but for Erised it was comforting, bringing a smile to her face. At the end of the hall, the very structure of the room became unstable, with the back wall having many holes strewn across its length, one of them even being large enough to where one could probably fit their fist inside of it. Erised took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the dungeon on her skin, before looking to the left and seeing what she came here for. Morrowind was writhing and groaning on the cold, hard ground of a cell, the stumps on his arms and legs having stopped bleeding, with dried bloodstains covering the cell, not all of them belonging to him. It was so dark that he couldn't even make out who it was standing in front of him, but he was terrified nonetheless, looking up at Erised's figure with a petrified expression.
What do you want? Who is this?
It's Erised, and I have some great news for you. Our gracious king has granted you a pardon. He'll be giving a speech with you as an example of what happens when you abuse his generosity, but after that, you'll be free to live your limbless life.
Wait, really? You can't be serious.
Erised held her hand up to the lock on the cell, causing it to fall off the bars, the lock hitting the floor with a clanging that echoed through the darkness.
Oh, I am! Now come on, let's get you out of here.
Morrowind gave Erised an expression of confusion and relief as she took hold of his collar. Erised proceeded to drag Morrowind throughout the dungeons and up the stairs she had taken in. This continued up the flight of stairs she initially took from the council room until she had made it to the ground floor. Marwan was dead silent through the whole ordeal, but he was smiling nonetheless, relieved that he may just get out of this situation unscathed. This would continue for nearly an hour as Eris had exited the castle, dragging him through the same streets he had been taken through the night before. Only this time, the streets were empty, all the people having gathered for King Edmund's speech. It wasn't long before Erised saw the stands in the center of town square, a large wooden platform with staircases on either side of it. As she approached the stands, the talking of thousands of confused peasants could be heard, as Edmund and Alpina stood silently atop the stands. Erised soon joined them, dragging Marwan up and tossing his body to the front, with him letting out a grunt of pain as he fell to Edmund's feet. Seeing such a disfigured and hurt man, the crowd fell silent, and not long after, the King of Luxon began to speak, a look of fury in his eyes.
1600 years ago, Queen Astrid Canellis lost her head to my blade. The centuries of pain she brought upon the people of Luxon were brought to an end. They were brought to an end by me, and me alone. And what do I get for it? This mutiny, this rebellion!
Edmund grabbed Marwan by the throat and held him up in front of the crowd. He had a petrified expression. His body was covered in cuts, bruises, and wounds riddled with infection. A man who had, 24 hours ago, been perfectly healthy, had been transformed to such a pathetic and sorry state.
This man! He believed that I was cruel, tyrannical, and he's not alone. Hundreds of you pitiful beings believe that I'm a scourge upon this world, who's done nothing but cause you pain. You people, who are far too young to know anything of what the world is truly like.
Edmund reached out his left hand towards Alpina. The woman summoned a small glass orb filled with a black liquid and handed it to him with a sadistic smirk, an expression which was currently shared by Erised.
My generosity, my sacrifice is what allowed you all to go about those frivolous lives you lead. And when under my leadership, there's only ever been one golden rule: to obey, to give the man who lost everything to bring you into this age of prosperity enough respect that you'd obey his commands.
Edmund's grip around Marwan's throat tightened, causing him to wince in pain.
King Edmund, please, I'm sorry.
Before Marwan could finish his sentence, Edmund took the glass orb and shoved it into Marwan's mouth, forcing his mouth shut to where it would shatter the orb and release the liquid down his throat.
And let it be known from this day forth, if you ever once believe that disobedience and rebellion will be met with anything but the harshest retribution, then you will face the same fate as this man before you.
As the black liquid made it down into Marwan's throat, his skin began to bubble and fall off, pounds of viscera falling to the floor, the viscous fluid beginning to eat away at his flesh. Marwan let out a guttural scream in abhorrent pain as the crowd started to panic and run away from the stands.
Don't you dare run! I gave you everything! Everything! And this is the thanks that I get! This is my payments for ending the reign of the most horrid woman in history! So look at him! Look at this man falling apart because he dared to question my authority. Look at this man who believed himself a king! Look at this man who thought he was above Edmund the Gold!
Edmund shook Marwan's body intensely as pounds of flesh and blood poured onto the floor. The skin of his throat had been eaten through as well, starting to even eat away at Edmund's hand as he held him up. Though he had no visible reaction, he simply stared out at the horrified crowd with the look of a man who had no hesitation in his soul. Over the next minute, Marwan's innards would spill across the floor, his screams slowly stopping before finally, the flesh of his neck completely gave out, his body falling away from his head, leaving Edmund's destroyed hand holding the head of a man with an expression of pure terror facing the crowd of people. After it was all over, Edmund simply crouched down to the remains of Marwan's body, holding a hand to where his heart was supposed to be. A green glow emanated from it as a small crystal orb appeared above Edmund's hand, filled with a bright green liquid. It was an essence, the main core of a person's being besides their soul, and the key to one's magic. Edmund took this essence into his hand and held it out to the crowd.
Look at the essence of a man who ruined his life. All because he believed himself superior to the god among men.
With a blank expression on his face, Edmund closed his fist, and the essence shattered in his hand. The crystalline walls of the essence cut into his hand as the green fluid poured out all over the stage, erasing every last remnant of life from Marwan's body.